In this lesson, we're going to learn how to lay out UVs. Alright, so up to this point, we have created materials and have applied them to our objects with zero issues up to this point. And materials are very easy to apply to objects. Now, whenever it comes down to the point of creating a texture, which is a 2D image, and we want to apply that to a 3D model, we have to go through a process that's called unwrapping UVs, or laying out UVs. Now, this is a process of taking the polygons that you have on your model and laying them out in a 2D space that matches the 2D image. Okay, so to get started with this, we're going to select one of the wings here, and I'm going to apply an Unwrap UVW modifier. Now, I'm going to apply this Unwrap UVW modifier just above my Editable Poly modifier here. So let's go ahead and hit our drop-down box, and this is going to be off screen, but it's called Unwrap UVW. Go ahead and apply that, and you'll see that this is now applied to both of the wings here, so we won't have to worry about that. And in the Unwrap UVW, you're going to notice a couple of things. First off, on the model, you'll notice that we have these green lines, these very vibrant green lines. These are what are called seams, and seams are areas on the UV that have been split or cut to lay out the UV. Now let's go ahead and open up our UV editor so we can see exactly what this UV looks like. So under your command panel, in your rollout section here, you can see that we have Edit UVs. Open the UV editor, and this is going to bring up a little dialog box or a UI here, and you'll notice that we have this checker pattern. Normally I like to turn that checker pattern off in the background so I can see my UVs much easier. Now, this doesn't look like a wing at all, does it? Okay, well, whenever you create geometry like this, like a wing, your UVs are going to be pretty much everywhere. It may look like a rat's nest, and you basically need to untangle it. The best way to think about UVing is if you've ever taken a cardboard box and you've wanted to flatten it out and fit it into your trash can much easier, what do you do with it? Well, you could lay it down on the ground and you could just jump on it and smash it flat. Well, that's kind of what the process is right here. Once you've taken that box and you look at it, it's not very pretty, and it may not fit even in the trash can all that well, and you'll start to fold it and try to get it together, and it can become a little bit of a hassle. So one way that you can get that box and flatten it out is to start cutting seams along the corners and things like that to flatten it out nice and neat. This is kind of the process that we're going to be taking here. So to get started with this, let's go ahead and select all of the faces or polygons in our UV. So you can use a marquee selection, and you can see right here in the editor or the viewport, you can see what polygons are selected. Now remember, these are not the polygons of the 3D model itself. These are the polygons of the UV. Okay, the UV is different than the polygons of the model. If we start moving some of these vertices and polygons around in here, it's not going to affect the actual shape of the model. So don't get confused by that. Alright, so with all of these selected, what do? Well, I can use several of these tools in the UV editor to start laying out the UVs and flattening out the UVs of my wing. So I'm going to go up here to mapping, and I'm going to use what's called flatten mapping. And if I click on this and then just hit OK with these default values, you're going to notice a couple of things. Our UVs have laid out and they're nice and flat. We've got a couple of objects here that look like the wings. So we have what looks like the top, or actually this is the bottom. So if I select this face, you'll see it correspond on the model. So this is the bottom of the wing, whereas this is the top of the wing. So let's say that I want to select this entire UV shell or cluster. Well, I can do that by activating the element toggle of my UV space, and whenever I select one of these, it will select that entire UV and select all of the faces that correspond in your editor. You can do the same thing here, and all of these elements that are broken apart into their own groups are called clusters or shells. Alright, so now what we want to do is we want to kind of piece these together so that way it's a little more manageable. There are going to be some pieces that just really don't make a whole lot of sense. First one, we have this piece right here that's all together. This is the front of the wing. And this will probably work pretty well, but I want to make these pieces as one as possible. Now I will separate it from the top and the bottom. That's going to be the best way to do this. So looking at the top part of this wing here, you're going to notice that there's some faces that are missing, okay? And you can see those right here. Now if I select those faces, I can see where they're at in my UV space. So I can actually move this right here, and you'll notice how this is not affecting the model, okay, but it is affecting the UV. So if I come in here, I can rotate these around, and I can move these into position and start to weld these UVs together. So how do I weld UVs? Well, I can go to vertex mode, and I can right click, and you see here that I have target weld and I have weld selected. Now these do the same thing, they just do it in a little bit different way, just like you've seen weld and target weld in the modeling section. So if I use weld selected, I have to have multiple vertices selected. Now while we're in vertex mode, you'll see that it just selected all of the vertices, and that's because of this element toggle. Let's go ahead and turn that off and try that selection again. Now only these are selected. Now if I right click and I hit weld selected, you'll see that those snap together. Now this may work, but you have to remember that your UVs, if they begin to move around, they could begin to skew a little bit. So what do I mean by skewing? Well, if we apply a 2D image to our wing here, you'll start to notice that the 2D image will skew in some places. So let's go ahead and apply this checker map pattern, and this is just a test image that we can use to help us in the UVing process. So with this vertex selected, if I grab my move tool and I move this around, notice right here how that is moving that texture around. Okay, and we don't want things like that. We don't want a lot of skewing going on. We want to try to get these as straight as possible. So this is pretty close to what we need here. Might bring that back down just a little bit. But all in all, you know, that's pretty close. Now I'm going to hit Control Z a couple of times and go back to where those were split apart. What I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to use that weld or that target weld function, and this works a little bit differently. Now with target weld, you don't need anything selected. You can right click and target weld, and if you click on this vertex and hold, you can drag this around, and notice how it's giving you the move tool icon with a W, and this is telling us what it can weld to. Now another thing that I want you to notice is that whenever you have a vertex selected or any sub-object selected, you'll notice that you have a corresponding blue vertex. And what this means is these two belong together. They are the same vertex in 3D space. So if I click and drag on this, it will only weld to the corresponding vertex, the blue one. So if you come up here, you'll notice that that icon is not changing from the black arrow to the white one. So if I hover over this, this turns into the white arrow that is basically closed together, and then those are now welded. I can do the same thing to this, and then I'll come down here and weld this. I'll weld these two together. Okay, and then if this doesn't have anything to weld to, you'll want to bring that down and just kind of pay attention to your texture and make sure that it's not skewing. Now on areas where there is a seam, that green line there, you may have a separation in the texture itself, so it may just kind of change direction. That is not skewing, that's just a change in the seam. Alright, or a split in the seam. And there's nothing really wrong with that. Alright, so let's continue to get the rest of our UVs here. It looks like we have another row that should belong right across the front here. So what I want to do is I want to select those edges on that seam. So I'm going to select this one and hold Control and continue to select those edges. Now you'll notice that that W is showing up, and that's because I still have my target weld still activated. If I right click, that should end that, and you'll see target weld is deactivated here. Let's hold down Control and let's continue to select all the way out to this edge. Now here you can see that it's going to select these pieces here. Now with these pieces, I like this seam, and so I don't want to weld that. I think that that is just fine the way it is. However, looking at this wing, it looks like I'm missing a couple of vertices or a couple of points right up in here. So I'm missing all of this corner of that wing. So I'm going to go to my polygon view or mode, select that element, and move that up into position here. And you can rotate them around, and you can position them a little bit better. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to vertex mode, and I'm going to use that target weld. Now I can right click and go to target weld, or I could use the interface and click target weld here. So I'm just going to click and hold and drop that on the corresponding vertex. Now you'll notice that that green line disappears and turns into a regular white line after we have target welded some of these. And the reason it's doing that is because it's no longer a seam. Okay, it has been completed. Alright, let me go ahead and grab these vertices here. And let's turn off that element mode, sorry about that. And I'm just going to move this down. And I'm paying attention to my texture here, just trying to make sure that I'm not skewing it too much. And we've been doing a pretty good job of taking care of this. So making sure those lines are nice and straight, nothing's very skewed. Now if it does get skewed a little bit, don't obsess over it, because we can use a relax tool to kind of help us flatten this out even more. So there's plenty of tools that we can use for UVing. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at the top. Let's make sure that we've got everything that we want, and that is done pretty well. Everything else is flattened out. All of these corners are good, and I'm okay with some of these extra pieces. These are on the edge, and they're really not as important to me on those. What's really important is just the top and the bottom, because that's where I want to apply a bump map. And in our next lesson, I'm going to show you how we can apply a texture map to our material. Alright, so I'll see you then.